Every week on Gracefully Graying, we explore issues that all of us face as we get older. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome as a special guest my good friend Monni Must, who has a story to tell that really impacts upon all of us, and especially upon those who are the 6 million who were never allowed to gracefully gray. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Monni Must.
Thank you, Henry.
Monni, it's a pleasure having you, and I've always felt that you're a special person with a very special talent. I'd like to tell our viewers a little bit about your background and your career in photography.
Well, what a lot of people don't know is that I have my degree in photography, and I started when I was in high school. And it became my way to express myself. And I kind of put that in the background. I have 4 children, I have 4 girls, and kind of put it away until the kids all were old enough that, and actually until my little one was 16 and she could drive, and then I started working. And it's always been my passion. And so it just kind of has evolved now, and photography is now really, truly my lifeline. Because when I'm not working and I'm not creating, I sometimes kind of go down.
And your studio, your company is Naturally Monni, and I've been a subject of your photographs along with other family members, and your work is beautiful. But you got onto another project, and really that's the focus of our show today. And tell us how you got involved with Holocaust survivors.
Well, it's not a pretty story. I knew nothing about Holocaust survivors as I was growing up. Certainly some of my friends growing up, their parents were Holocaust survivors who they never really had conversations. I just knew that they had an accent. Some of them had tattoos. But I knew it was during World War II, but it was never really talked about. 2007, November 14th, actually, next week, November 14th, 2007, my daughter Miya passed. And it threw me into, as you can only well imagine, it threw me into a spiral. And
it was a tragedy, and it's understandable.
It was a tragedy. It was a horrific tragedy. And I didn't quite know how I was going to survive. And so that was November 2007. In January, February 2008, I thought, I've got to figure out, number one, how people are going to remember Miya. Number 2, how I am going to continue to live without my daughter. And number 3, how do I go about doing that? And somebody had come up to me and asked me, it was around Purim, before Purim, and asked me if I would photograph children on Holocaust survivors' laps at Purim, at the Jewish Center. And I said, that's not something that I would do. It's not like Santa on a kid on a,
Right.
It's just not kind of photography that I would do. But I went to bed that night and I woke up in the morning and I thought, oh my God, Holocaust survivors. They have been through horrific tragedies. They could tell me how I'm going to be able to survive. And I put an ad in the Jewish News. I actually just was at the beauty shop and I ran into one of the survivors that I had photographed. And she was kind of reiterating the story, that I had forgotten. I had put an ad in the Jewish News and said, I would like to photograph Holocaust survivors, interview them, and please meet me at da-da-da-da-da, date and time, and you know, if you would like to be involved in this project. 100 showed up. I couldn't believe it, and their families.
It's an amazing response.
Yeah, we had a dinner at Buddy's and signed them up. These were all Detroiters, and I started photographing them. And I found that when I was working and photographing them, I could function. But as soon as I was done, I was just a zero.
Well, this gave you a purpose.
And that is the
purpose.
point. And that the point is for anybody who has gone through a horrific tragedy, something like that, you have to find a purpose, a reason, and to continue on and to go. It would have been very easy for me to pull the covers over my head and not get out of bed. And I just could not do that. I knew that I had to continue going.
You've got this amazing talent, and you're expressing this.
Thank you. Anyway, so to make a long story short, I started photographing survivors, and towards the end of about 2/3 through the book, through the photographing the survivors, I went on a particularly horrible, rainy, similar day that we had yesterday. Very cold, rainy day. I think it was in March of 2009. I pulled up to this woman's house, and I said to my assistant, Linda Schlesinger at the time, who is my very close friend and helped me photograph, and she took down all the stories. And actually, my daughter, Sabrina, wrote all the bios that go along with the stories.
I was going to say that it was a collaboration between you and Sabrina. And
right. And Linda helped me. Linda traveled all over the world with me and shared a lot of tears with me. And I said to Linda, I cannot do this today. I cannot go in. And she said, come on, you know, we're already here. We're in a different part of Detroit that I'd ever been in. She was a woman that was kind of off the radar. A lot of the survivors that I photographed, you know, a lot of people know, very public, but this particular woman was kind of off the radar. And I said, okay, I'll go in. I walk in, and she said, I only have 10 minutes, and I really don't want to talk. And I said, okay, you know, you can do whatever you want. And she had a front window and glass bottles on all the front window, and the light coming into her window was so magnificent. And I looked at her and I said, you know, Aileen, would you mind if I just did your portrait? And you don't have to talk. We'll just do your portrait and we'll be done. She said, okay. So I moved everything and got everything situated the way that I wanted to do it. And she let me photograph her, and she looked at me and she says, you see that portrait on the wall? And I said, yeah. She goes, that was my daughter who died. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. And she looked at me and she said, so how did your daughter die? And I said, how did you know? Because I had not spoken to anyone about that. I didn't want it interfering with why I was coming to them.
Right.
And I said, how did you know? And she said, because I know the look. And she said, would you like to sit down with me and talk to me? And I said, sure. And we sat and talked for over 2 hours. And as I was leaving, she looked at me and she said, Monni, she said, I want to tell you something. I promise you will find joy again. And that was my turning point. That I didn't believe her at the time.
Of course.
But here my daughter had been gone for almost 1.5 years at that point. And I will never forget that moment. You know, she changed my life because I did not believe it. And I also didn't believe it because I wasn't quite sure if I should feel guilty if ever I smiled again. You know? And so, fast forward, you know, I published the book, which was this one here.
This is the first one was really on local survivors.
Yes, the first one is Detroit Survivors.
It's a beautiful book. I have it, and
This
again,
was the portrait
this
actually
is the woman,
of
and there's the
Aileen.
glass.
Yeah, her glass. Nice woman. Anyway, and I was just thinking as I was preparing to come here. See all these papers? These are all the Detroit survivors that since I photographed them have passed. All of these pages. So
I mean,
it's significant.
You've made a memorial while they were alive. Otherwise,
Well, they spoke for everybody. They represented everybody who could not speak for themselves. And it's not about all their individual stories. It is about being able to honor everyone and know that this happened.
and these photographs here, why don't you, we have like 2 minutes of this segment left. Why don't you explain them for our viewers? Because I know during the break you're going to put some other photographs up.
Well, this particular woman, she was a twin with her daughter, with her sister Pearl, and Mengele.
And those are the remnants of her tattoo from the.
But every portrait that I did, I would walk into the person's house, and I would review their whole house, and kind of see who they were. And there is this, every single thing that is in the portrait is significant. And the reason that she is holding pearls is because that was her twin sister. Her name was Pearl. So I had her holding, and Pearl actually had passed 2 weeks before I did this portrait. So she is holding, you can see that it's significant that she has her tattoo,
Right.
and that she's holding her pearls, and that was that significant. This one, if we have time, this one
Yes.
here is these people, Fanny and Jack Lust. They, the painting in the background, their daughter had done. And I said to Fanny, I said, I'd like to replicate that. I said, do you have a red dress and do you have a blue shirt? And they said, no, we don't. And I said, okay, well, let's go into your closet. And sure enough, I found in the very back part of her closet the same dress that she wore for that portrait,
amazing.
and found a shirt that was the same color. So I would go into people's houses and into their closets and into their most personal things and grab, whatever I thought was significant to do the portrait.
Is that as I've been interviewing people, some of them retirees, some of them in medical and psychological and other professions that relate to all of us who are gracefully graying, one of the important things as you move forward with life, if you're retired, having a purpose is so important. And so whether you're retired or not, a purpose is important. So Monni, what I'd like to do is go back to the Holocaust survivors' photos, and why don't you talk about these two? And then what I'd like to ask you is really, you finished one project, which is really local survivors, and what prompted you to expand so that you were literally flying all over the world with this wonderful project?
Well, once I finished the Detroit Survivors, I didn't feel finished. It's like when you have one child, you have one and then you go, man, I need to have more. And I just felt like there was so much more for me to do. And I had a local survivor here, Alex Karp, who I adore, and he didn't want to participate in the first book. And he called me when I got done and he said, Monni, I made a mistake. I would like to I would like you to photograph me. And I had like cities calling me, friends calling from different cities, and said, one friend from Chicago said, we have the most Holocaust survivors in the country. And somebody from St. Louis called me and said, we have the most Holocaust survivors in the country. And LA called me and said, come down here, we have the most. And so I said, you know what, I'll do a book in Chicago. So I started to make arrangements to do Chicago. And I called Alex and I said, you know, Alex, I'll put you in my Chicago book. I'll put you in this book. And Linda, who's a rule keeper, said, you cannot do that. You call him back, and these are Chicago survivors, and you cannot have him in there. I said, okay, fine. Then you know what? I'm going to do one of the whole United States. That way I can put Alex in there, because I loved him. And so, so I started going around the United States. I get to LA, and I'm in LA, and I'm photographing this, talking to this woman, Marie Kaufman, and she was from France, and she was going down. She tells me while we were talking to her, that she's going to France to Murat. I can't remember where it's right by LB, but it's a tiny little town that even the people in LB didn't know in France, you know, the tiny town. And she was going to visit the people who had saved her and had housed her and her mother and her sister. I said to her, really? I said, I would like to meet you there and photograph you with the people who saved you. And Linda looked at me and she said, I said, we're going. And all of a sudden it exploded. And so now I was going to France. And so then exploded, and we ended up traveling all over the world, photographing survivors. So that's kind of how it went, and just kept going.
Explain, first of all, this is a local picture. Why don't you tell us about the story behind this couple?
These two ladies, Augie and Ansi, they're twins, and they survived the war together. Their father had died when they were little, and their mother was also passed during the Holocaust. And these two were inseparable, and they were on a death march, and they would tie two belts together, and wherever each one would go, the other one would follow. And they really literally, it was like an umbilical cord between the two of them, these two belts, that they were never separated. To this day, they live next door to each other, and they don't even know who's Ansi and who's Augie. They have exchanged their names so much, and you don't really know who's who, but they are like this.
Now, were they identical, or are they fraternal twins?
They are fraternal twins,
yeah.
but you know.
They're like one.
But anyway, yes, yeah. They're like one. So that's why I photographed them where their apartment complex was entwined on one bench. That's the significance there. This lady is Alice Hertz Summers. She was the oldest survivor, 111 when she passed a few years ago.
How old was she at the time of this picture?
She was probably 100 and, let's see, I don't know, 107 maybe when I did that. She was a pianist, and she was in Theresienstadt. And that's a portrait of her son above, who was a cellist. But she was the most delightful woman I've ever met. And she lived in London. And I searched for her for a year and a half. And I could not, I called so many people to try to find out where she was.
Well, who told you to find her? I mean, what made you seek her out?
She was, I had seen it wasn't a podcast then, a YouTube thing
right.
on her, the lady in room 7, I think, whatever her apartment number was, or 9 or 5 or whatever. Anyway, so I found her, and I mean, when I go to London, I mean, she's passed now, but whenever I would go to London, I would go and visit her, and stay and see her.
So you've done 3 books so far?
So actually, the international sets are there are 3 set of 3. So with the Detroit one, it's a set of 4. And everything is significant on here. This is one of the portraits, and so you know that how the three fit together. And this set of three, I found that it was important in order for people to connect with themselves. We added their maiden name, their original name, because a lot of people change their names, their tattoo number, the city that they were born in. There were people that were able to connect themselves all around the world, that people would see the tattoo number and realize that they were in line with them to get tattoo at the same camp, in line to get the tattoo. There were people who have connected that realized that they grew up in the same city as somebody else. There was somebody who lived in Krakow that came in and visited. I met him in Chicago to come visit him. He was coming to the States, and he met with his friend that he had known in LA. So he flew down to LA to be with her and hadn't seen her in 70 years.
Did this series that you've done, did this bring people back together? I mean, did people reach out after when they heard what you were doing?
Well, I would say yes. I mean, of course. I mean, it's like, and for me, I stay in touch with many of the survivors. And, the name of your program is Gracefully Graying. And, as we get older, you forget details and you forget everything. I remember every single portrait that I did in these 4 volumes. I remember every detail. I mean, I don't remember what I did last week for my portrait.
But you put so much into these.
Because these people were so significant in my life, it was a tribute to my daughter Miya. And it is a way for people to remember my daughter Miya.
Who was a wonderful human being. I mean, I knew her, and she was a beautiful soul.
Yes. That it keeps Miya alive for me. And everything that I do now, from the day she died forward, is in Miya's memory. So, any project that I do now that of significance has to do with Miya kind of pushing me forward to do it.
Were there any common threads that you saw among the Holocaust survivors? And we're down to 2 minutes, so I'd like to do that, then I'd like to have your final thoughts.
I think that the common thread is, the amazing thing about this was that these people didn't know me from anyone. And Linda and I would show up with all my equipment, and they would let me into their houses. Not only would they let me into their houses without knowing me or anything about me, but I would go into their deepest, darkest secrets, into their drawers, into their closets, into their kitchens, into everything. And they allowed me to do it, and I would pull out things to be photographed for their portraits. And one last thing that is significant, because as you know, I'm a photographer. Without fail, every survivor that we walked into their house would say, "Let me show you this photograph." Photographs are so important because that is what is left a lot of the time.
That's so true. What are some final thoughts you'd like to share in the next 30 seconds as we wrap up this show?
I think that it's so important for people to have a fit passion and to do something significant with their life. And as we retire, people retire, do something worthwhile. Help out somebody even just once a week. Just do something that makes you feel good and makes somebody else feel good, because then it gives you purpose.
And that's important. And
yes.
Monni, you've done so much, and you're a beautiful human being.
Oh, Henry, thank you.
I want to thank you so much for being my guest on Gracefully Graying. And I want to thank you for watching Gracefully Gray.